like. Thank you for helping figure that
Perfect.
out.
Great.
I've had a lot of updates on Teams at the moment. I don't know if something's playing up there, but I'll dive right into it. So I'm a dyslexia specialist at Nottingham Trent University, and despite the job title, just to point out, I do kind of work regularly with other neurodivergent and disabled students as well. And in that job role, we do work with students across the whole university, many different types of courses, many different levels of study. So it's very, without giving my conclusion away, it's very difficult to provide consistent advice about AI across all the range of courses and the different uses that AI can be put towards. So I've kicked off with this picture of Bart from an episode of The Simpsons, where, if you remember this episode, he accidentally joins the junior campers. It's like the Boy Scouts, and he finds it all incredibly boring until he finds out that he gets to use a pocket knife at some point, an interesting and sort of forbidden tool. Um, but he has to read this incredibly complicated safety manual before he's allowed to do so. So I feel like this sometimes when I'm working with students trying to navigate AI policies. On the one hand, bearing in mind what I think of as maybe the more constructive uses of AI and possibly less constructive uses of AI, as well as bearing in mind, in the immediate challenge, making sure we abide by whatever's in the local policy on AI for that particular course and that particular assessment. So it's a tough needle to thread, which is why I'm interested in policies and the clarity of them. So in response to this, I've kind of been involved in a few projects, and there's two main things I've brought along to talk about today. Firstly, some findings from a student survey that we've done, and secondly, a kind of work in progress towards hopefully a review of policies across the wider sector. And just a side note, I have appeared on this webinar series before talking about AI and dyslexia, way back now. It seems a long, long time ago in the old ages of 2023. If you did want to go and find out a bit more about AI and dyslexia there. So myself, a student, and two academics from the business school got a tiny bit of internal funding to put together this student survey project where we and a key justification for this was really that despite the huge hype around AI, there were very few disabled voices, I felt, being included in those conversations, despite a lot of the noise around inclusion and personalization and all the wonderful things that it may well be able to do. So there's quite a few other topics included in this report. I'll put a link to the report in the chat as well. But it's just two specific questions from that I'll kind of focus on today. So what we're really interested in here, the two questions that we looked at in terms of do students feel like the AI policy is clear, and are they satisfied with the level of support they've received around working with AI? And overall, we would say these are probably not very stellar satisfaction figures that we looked at. 37% were happy with the clarity of the AI policy, and 28% with the guidance and support that they've received. But as with lots of the topics today, I suppose, what does any of this mean in isolation? Well, we did borrow these questions from a HEPI survey. Again, I think this has been mentioned by other speakers, so we're probably familiar with this. We borrowed these questions from a HEPI survey, so we can kind of compare that to a slightly broader 1,500 student sample. And so certainly in terms of the clarity of AI policy, the students that we surveyed seemed to be a fair bit less clear on the policies than the HEPI sample. And finally, on this kind of point, HEPI have rerun their survey, and actually we added in some of our questions to our kind of end of year survey for any student who's engaged in the disability department. And across everything from 2024 to 2025, we have seen a sort of general improvement, I think, across the board. Given the amount of activity and discussion, you'd think, well, perhaps it's almost inevitable that there would be some improvement. And I can still note that, again, the students that we're surveying are saying this is still not as clear as perhaps their peers in the HEPI sample. because, broadly speaking, they may have more questions about their specific uses of technology, more nuanced needs. They might find it harder to find the policies and to deal with that kind of ambiguous academic best practice guidance and so on. But there's possibly a bit of a strange silver lining, maybe, in terms of their satisfaction with the guidance and support that they've received. There's still not amazing figures by any stretch, but actually our sample's slightly ahead of the HEPI sample in satisfaction in this sense. So possibly a bit of uncertainty and ambiguity initially might have actually helped prompt people to have those difficult discussions and hash things out, rather than taking a very hard line or something at the start and then just having to kind of row back and reverse it all. So that's the sort of first half of the things that I want to talk to you about today. And I think it just reinforces the need for more work on the policies, more work on the clarity, particularly from a disability perspective. And now I'm going to move into what the range of AI policies are out there and what are they actually kind of trying to achieve, which is a bit more work in progress. So these are some simple questions that are based on a workshop that I delivered at a dyslexia specialist conference quite recently. We've discussed a range of other policies in detail, and I'm hoping to kind of build on this approach more with some colleagues at NTU. So I'm not going to go through all of the questions here, but just briefly, just the two that I've kind of highlighted on the screen there. Does the institution have a kind of overarching approach to AI? Do they sort of seem fairly positive or negative? And is there a kind of more detailed scale or framework being brought up? So from our sort of rough approach to this so far, so yeah, on the left, it might seem like a kind of small detail, but it's quite interesting to look at the range of statements by universities and think, is there a steer here that the assumption for any student for any assessment should be that you can use AI unless you're told you can't, or is it vice versa? Assume that you can't for anything unless you're given specific permission that you can. And it's really interesting that that's come up as a kind of 50-50 split on our very kind of rough analysis at the moment, at least. But I think people would probably see some reality in that. Then on the right, in terms of whether there's an institutional scale, traffic lights have come up quite a bit in the chat. I'm sure we're kind of familiar with this. King's College, I mentioned their kind of four-point scale. Is there some sort of institution-wide point of reference for people to point to, reflect on, even if it isn't necessarily the final line? And that's kind of the minority at the moment, I think, but it could be something that grows or changes. So these are just some examples, a few examples of places where I found, there are more. This wasn't a comprehensive look at the whole sector, although, we're trying to move in that kind of direction. And from my point of view, maybe I'm just being selfish. Maybe there are problems with this sort of approach that aren't available, but it would probably make a lot of those conversations that I have with the students that I see a lot simpler if there was a point of reference for everyone to kind of look to. And I would say consider that, disabled students, but really any student, they're going to get advice and support from a whole range of places other than your particular module guide. They're going to ask their friends, they're going to ask family, they're going to ask librarians, the disability team, people inside and outside of the university. And even if this isn't the final word, there will always be a bit of a disclaimer about, make sure you speak to your tutor about this particular assessment and so on. Even if that's the case, I think it's a really useful starting point. Maybe we'll see more movement in this direction over time, or maybe we'll look back in 10 years and say, actually, this was a bit of an early reaction or a sort of transitional phase to something else. But that's kind of above my pay grade, to be totally honest. So I would say compared to where we were, 2, 3 or 4 years ago, there are policies out there now to critique and examine at least, which if we talk about the kind of variety of outcomes from this, I probably don't need to spend a huge amount of time on this. These are all from a range of articles. When it comes to the kind of hardline outcomes, academic misconduct, I think the overall picture that emerges is that it's a really mixed bag, if it is even being kind of collected and looked at, examined in this way. So taking this and going back to our student point of view, is it really any wonder that students are a bit confused by the picture? Their friend at another university on a similar course may be getting a completely different type of steer on things, and I appreciate it is a challenging environment. So to wrap up, my main conclusion is that clearly a lot of work has gone into these AI policies, but I think the dust is still settling. Things are still kind of mobile. If we think that there are changes that could be made, then now might still be a good time to be pushing for them. I hope you feel able to go and speak to somebody in your disability department if about this kind of thing, if you haven't done so already, and if your institution is collecting data or asking students how they feel about your policies. Is there any disability data in there as a specific category? Because everyone's got a kind of anecdote and a rough idea about these situations, but I think we can do a bit better than that. And my kind of smaller conclusions, more kind of food for thought in the future, really. If you'll just allow me to flick a teaspoon of cold water onto the bonfire of AI optimism. Just students are not universally enamored with big tech and all of the various things that they're kind of involved in and responsible for. They do like to go outside and touch grass every now and then, but more immediately, perhaps from our educators' point of view, there's many, many, many things we could do around inclusion that don't involve technology, or at least much simpler technologies used in more consistent ways, as I've ably demonstrated by failing to get into the Teams meeting. And the second point, and I think some of this has come up in the chat around the looming presence of the AI therapist and the AI educator and the AI advice person. That's a whole topic for another occasion. Phil, if you want to do another webinar series on that, I'm sure you would be oversubscribed. But if we really lean into AI, how much of the connective tissue of the kind of educational experience do we strip out, and do we kind of lose as a result? Particularly, not just as a sort of nice to have mental health thing, but very real impacts on learning, not to mention the soft skills and communication that may all be kind of affected by that. So to tie it all back to Bart, in this particular episode, yes, he was initially attracted by this forbidden and powerful tool of the penknife in this episode, and he was frustrated at having to go through the training steps. But he does stay with the junior campers in this episode and does learn all sorts of other useful skills along the way, which, linking it back to this kind of thing about isolation, I think, being part of a group, being part of a learning community, he wasn't just given access to a tool and expected to somehow figure it all out on his own. So that's my piece, and there's various links, and if the slides are going around later, then you will have access to those. So there we go.
Thank you so much, Richard. I love that. That was so interesting. And I think the point at the end about kind of technology and kind of other things are available. And I think we forget that, don't we? I think it's so important to remember, kind of putting that aside. I have two young children. One of them's 9. He loves playing with AI and asking it questions about this, that, and the other. So he loves all of the things kind of that we expect children nowadays to love. But recently he's found a love for pogo sticks, which is kind of taking things way back. So we shouldn't assume that kids are only going to want to play with kind of the latest and most shiny things. Sometimes something as basic as a pogo stick can actually bring a lot of fun. And for myself as well, I've nearly developed a few injuries recently having a go on it. So it's I think it's such an important point to make. And thank you, Richard. I thought that was such a nice way to to end kind of the webinar. We do have one question from Joshua Thorpe. Joshua has spoken on the
Great.
webinars previously as well. I thought it was quite a good one. And he said, anecdotally, any students with positive interactions or habits related to Gen AI?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, yes, probably the student who was a kind of co-creator, co-collaborator on the survey that I mentioned. I've posted the link to our report in the chat now down below. Was certainly, it was really helpful to have them along, just to even pose some of these ideas and have those discussions with. We on this last slide, myself and the two academics, we have got a conference paper that's shortly to come out. It's very kind of only very recently had news about that. But we do maybe get into some of the pros and cons a bit more. And I guess I would say they're very aware of the things that it doesn't help them out with. So things like working memory and actually being overloaded with a lot of the information that AI can kind of throw at you is it doesn't help, or is possibly a detriment to that. The waffle, the social aspect, the presentations, certainly. Sorry, sorry, you were asking for positive examples, weren't you?
It's always good to have both. Don't worry. It's yeah. No, I thought that was interesting.
Yes, I mean, certainly, I think Grammarly's come up a few times in the chat, although, I mean, that's a really interesting case where 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't really have to worry about whether students were using Grammarly or not. And now students are concerned that they will be caught out. And partly that's because of things that Grammarly has changed about its product, and then partly, obviously, it's about how universities have sort of changed. But I think overall, we're it's a slow progress, but we're getting somewhere.
Thank you. I think Grammarly is an interesting one, actually. We actually had a talk from a student speaker very recently. I'm not sure if you were at that talk, Richard. Dino, he gave an amazing talk. He really did.
Yes. Well, I think I caught it.
He was talking about Grammarly, and he was saying that actually, as a neurodivergent student, he doesn't find the AI kind of plugin for that tool helpful. But the point he wanted to make was that he can't turn it off. So
no, absolutely.
It's important to remember that while that's there, doesn't mean he's going to use it, and
Right.
So I just think that was.
And these things are all, I mean, they are all commercial. To some extent, these are all kind of commercial products at the end of the day. And we've heard ChatGPT and the like will be is certainly looking at inserting more advertising to things, and becoming more sycophantic and all of those sorts of dangerous things, purely because their goal is to keep you on the platform, even if it's annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure to have you back. Thank you so much for kind of carving the time out to join us today. We're going to call it time there today, if that's okay.